Despite launching with almost unanimously glowing reviews, Gran Turismo 7 got a lot of heat recently due to a number of issues that popped up about a week after its release. They had to do some extended server maintenance for 30 hours following a bugged patch release, which was a huge issue because the game's online-only nature meant that it was unplayable for over a day, less than a week after launch. That same patch also nerfed prize payouts from races significantly, which just feels greedy when coupled with the microtransactions for in-game currency, which are priced much higher than they were in previous GT titles. Polyphony Digital has addressed some of these points in a blog post detailing a patch that will be released sometime this month, but I'm here to say that while those issues may have caused an uproar on the internet, I consider them to be secondary issues. If you're reviewing Gran Turismo 7 as purely a driving game, then yes, it's spectacular. But if you're coming to it as a fan of the Gran Turismo series and what has traditionally made the series great, it barely feels like it belongs to the series. So what happened here? Well, over the past 3 years I've spent a lot of time stuck in my apartment and playing all non-PS3 Gran Turismo campaigns. I've managed to boil down what makes them so great to 3 key pillars: the vibe, the structure, and the journey. So in this video I want to explain each of these points and then dig into how Gran Turismo 7 deviates from them and ends up not feeling like Gran Turismo at all as a result. Let's start with the vibe. One of the common criticisms of Gran Turismo is that it feels a bit too pretentious for some people. It can be very polarizing. As a game, Gran Turismo wants to show respect to all aspects of car culture. The history, the engineering, motorsport, the feeling of owning and maintaining a car you love. It doesn't matter what kind of car it is either. It can be a tiny K car, it can be a pricey German sports car, or it can be some Formula 1 monster. All of them are deemed to be interesting and equally worthy of love and admiration. Gran Turismo has very classy, understated production throughout its menus and UI. It creates nice, relaxing breathing room between the loud roaring of the events you'll complete throughout the campaign, and it fills the background with something not too distracting from taking in the cars themselves whenever you're browsing a dealership or your garage. I think for a lot of people, Gran Turismo is more than just an excuse to make a car go vroom vroom around a track for 40 hours. It's an interactive car museum where every car on display can be driven, and the campaign guides you through experiencing a tasting platter of cars from throughout history. If GT7 had a number of skill points to divide amongst these 3 points, most of them went into pushing the trademark vibe to the next level. GT Cafe is this game's main progression system. For most of the campaign, you go through menus where you're tasked with collecting 3 cars within a given theme. Once you've collected all 3 of them, you return to the in-game cafe, and the cafe owner gives you a nice little speech explaining the theme and a brief history of what made each of the cars you just collected notable. You can go to the GT Cafe at any time, and different guests will appear depending on which car you're currently in. While I think the cafe owner Luca's short speeches on the menu books tend to be very surface level and somewhat disappointing, the optional guest dialogue is where the system really shines and serves to directly educate the player about the cars they're interested in. These guests aren't just NPCs made for the sake of the game either. Sometimes the real-life designer of the car you're riding will be there to offer their insight into how the car was made or what the design philosophy of the car was. If previous Gran Turismo games are car museums you wander through on your own, Gran Turismo 7 feels like perusing the museum while actively engaging in conversation with a museum guide or a specially invited guest, and it really does contribute to Gran Turismo's greater vision. Next, we've got the structure. If you were to generalize Gran Turismo campaigns over the year, they are structured fairly consistently. The game revolves around completing racing events. Each event is either a series of races that can be completed individually, or a championship which requires you to play all the races in order while achieving high placements on each one to maintain a high placement in the championship overall. Each event has different car criteria. Some are drivetrain challenges, some have performance restrictions, some are limited to specific engine types, countries of origins, or model years. Completing a race gets you credits which can be put towards cars and upgrades, and getting a first place finish in an event awards you a prize car. Events are grouped into different tiers, either by difficulty or their license requirement, which is often a proxy for difficulty. Most of the time, the events within these tiers can be completed in any order, but tiers must be completed in difficulty or license order. The game ends with the Gran Turismo World Championship, a championship event that usually takes about 90 minutes to complete and test your skill with powerful race cars on the trickiest tracks. On the side, you've generally got access to a bunch of optional events that can be completed for fun, prize cars, and credits, and winning the Gran Turismo World Championship, and therefore beating the game, unlocks an entire extra tier of events to continue exploring the full variety of cars in. Every game brings its own little twist on the formula, but at a high level, that's how the campaign has traditionally been structured. It becomes immediately apparent upon launching Gran Turismo 7 that the structure is very different. Everything in the game is locked by default and must be unlocked gradually throughout the campaign's 39 menu books, which are played through one at a time in a completely linear fashion. GT Cafe menu books primarily come in 3 flavors. Collection menu books give you 3 cars in a theme to collect to progress. Championship menu books require you to beat a championship event to progress. And for lack of a better term, tutorial menu books require you to use a game feature for the first time to progress. The bulk of the campaign consists of collection menu books, and the only requirement to progress is to own the 3 cars requested by that menu book. Each collection menu book also unlocks a matching amount of races, each awarding one of the cars you need if you get a podium finish. Ultimately, the game does not care if you beat or even play these races, it only cares about car ownership. Gran Turismo Sport introduced the system where race cars are split into a bunch of classes: Group 4, Group 3, Group 2, and Group 1 for race cars of increasing power, and Group B for rally cars. Let me give a tip to anyone who hasn't started the campaign yet. Do not spend any money on race cars until you've unlocked an event that lets you use them. Here's the issue. This campaign is completely linear, and the first 2/3 of the game explicitly requires road cars only. If you blow your cash on a car that you can't use anywhere, you aren't getting any of that cash back, because at time of writing, selling cars is not a feature of Gran Turismo 7. You're just stuck with a completely useless car until you unlock multiplayer, I guess. It goes deeper than that. You will eventually unlock a very limited amount of optional Group 4 and Group 3 events about halfway through the game if you want to use those classes of cars. Rally races don't get unlocked at all until menu 37 of 39 near the very end of the game, so you definitely shouldn't buy Group B cars until then. No events exist in this campaign, required or optional, that let you drive Group 2 and Group 1 cars without capping their power artificially to meet an event's performance point limit. You can, however, use them in a handful of driving missions which let you use your own car without capping your power. Unlike past GT titles, no post-game events are unlocked upon beating the game. This means there is ultimately nowhere where Group 2 and Group 1 cars are usable at full power in the single-player campaign. Shockingly, no events in the game require the International B, International A, or Super licenses. Usually, the IB and IA licenses see use for the second half of the game, and because they're completely unused in this game, it makes it feel like half a campaign that just cuts abruptly to the Gran Turismo World Championship. And last, we've got the journey. Gran Turismo campaigns are a slow journey, usually taking place over 40-ish hours, where the player starts in a compact road car that they can probably find parked down their street, and ramps up until the Gran Turismo World Championship, which they will probably be beating in either a highly tuned road car or in a race car depending on the title. Over the course of a playthrough, the campaign aims to create an emotional bond between the player and the cars that got them through the game. The goal is to develop gratitude for those cars and appreciation for their designs and engineering. You're often going to run into events where none of the cars you own are eligible to enter, and you're going to need to go shopping for one that is. The very act of making a choice about which car you buy naturally makes you feel more invested in that car and likelier to remember it than you would be if the car just fell into your lap. Gran Turismo's simulation focus also helps with this because cars feel distinct from each other in the way they drive, so there's more to love or hate about a car than how they look. Not everyone is going to buy the same cars, not everyone is going to beat the events in the same order, meaning that they might not have access to certain prize cars at the same time you did, and by the end of the game, everyone's garage is a unique snowflake. Gran Turismo games have near infinite replayability, and I'm living proof of it. The pile of games I want to play has kept growing consistently since the year 2000, but I sure as hell keep coming back to Gran Turismo 2 and Gran Turismo 4 because I can always play those games in a way that feels fresh, decades after their initial release. They're the perfect gaming comfort food. And I guess the thing I need to touch on now is that I'm not even a car person. At time of writing, I'm almost 31, I don't have a license, and I have no intention of ever learning how to drive. Everything I know about cars, I know purely because of Gran Turismo and the experiences I've had within the series. I have strong opinions about which drivetrains are good, four-wheel drive, and which are bad, all the other ones. I've got this sweet WRX hoodie not because I'm the proud owner of a WRX in real life, but because the WRX is as trusty a companion throughout my Gran Turismo career as Starmie or Lantern have been throughout my life as a Pokemon trainer over the years. I wouldn't have seeked out car museums or showrooms over the last 10 years of my travels to Japan as much as I have if it wasn't for a bunch of these cars essentially being party members in what I consider to be my favorite JRPG. Well, you can't talk about JRPG design without talking about resource management, and Gran Turismo 7 does very poorly in that field. Gran Turismo 7 has a campaign that awards you in-game currency, but then makes it really hard for you not to feel bad by spending that currency before you finish the campaign. You can accidentally buy cars that are awarded in a later menu book. I did this accidentally with the WRX, then immediately unlocked the menu book that asked me to collect a WRX a few minutes later. That meant that instead of having to do 3 races to complete the menu book, I only had to complete 2 races, since again, it's not event completion, but car ownership that gates progress in this game. It still sucks that I spent credits on a car that I would have gotten for free 15 minutes later anyway, and that whole experience made me incredibly reluctant to buy any cars throughout the campaign in fear that it would happen again. Some menu books require you to spend your own credits to upgrade specific previous price cars. This causes 2 feel bads at once. You don't feel like you retain full ownership of your garage cars because you may be forced to upgrade them in ways you find distasteful to progress the game. And you don't know how much of your credits are safe to spend at any moment because there's a precedent set that the game can ask you randomly to spend credits you don't necessarily want to spend. Now here's the big issue. You only need to buy 2 cars in the entire Gran Turismo 7 campaign. Your starter car, which has 3 available cars to choose from, and a pickup truck, with 2 available trucks to choose from. Every other car you need to beat the game is a prize car from a prior event, and most of the time, it's from the event immediately preceding the one you're going to do. Sure, on paper, there's nothing in the game that's actively preventing you from buying different cars to use throughout the campaign instead of relying on your prize cars, but there's no real reason to do so, and there's so many feel-bads tied up with spending money in this game that you're very unlikely to do this in a first playthrough when you can't plan around what's coming up next. And ultimately, there isn't enough of substance in this game due to its linearity and repetitive, uninspired event design that it isn't really something you're going to want to play through multiple times either. Gran Turismo 7 is especially weird considering the context surrounding how we got here. Gran Turismo Sport launched in October of 2017 with essentially no single-player content aside from what felt like license tests and exercises to familiarize yourself with all of the courses. The game was designed entirely around online multiplayer and the competitive esports circuit, with the idea that Gran Turismo games going forward would stop being full-scale, numbered releases, but rather named games focused on a single facet of the overall Gran Turismo experience. I don't think this was communicated as well as they had hoped, especially outside of Japan, and therefore Gran Turismo fans rioted shortly after the launch of the game due to the lack of any meaningful single-player content. By the end of the year, Polyphony Digital had patched in a very hastily implemented GT League single-player campaign, which would continue to see additional events added to it via online updates. I can't overstate just how phoned in this campaign was, and I'm pretty sure most people who were furious at the lack of single-player content at launch never actually came back to give it a shot. Gran Turismo 7, on paper, is a response to everything that went wrong with Gran Turismo Sport's public perception. The number is back in the title, making clear that this is trying to be a full-featured release. Very quickly they showed off that the main menu of this game is a world map, a throwback to Gran Turismo 4's campaign, which is widely considered to be the best driving game campaign of all time. People were expecting a return to form for the series, and Polyphony Digital raised the expectations even higher by winking at the players with that Gran Turismo 4 world map throwback. For Gran Turismo 7 to miss the mark this badly really shatters my trust in Polyphony Digital's ability to understand what makes Gran Turismo great and differentiated amongst other driving games out there. This was the game that was supposed to repair the reputational damage that the series had suffered with Gran Turismo Sport. Well, it's unfortunate, but the phoned-in campaign that they whipped up with 4 months of UI scripting on Gran Turismo Sport feels like a more traditional Gran Turismo campaign than this one does. One could look at this whole video and interpret it as me being afraid of change in the Gran Turismo series, so I want to dispel that by stating that I do believe the series is in dire need of change, but this isn't the kind of change I had in mind. If you look back at Gran Turismo 5 and 6, while they're undeniably more technologically advanced than Gran Turismo 4, I don't think you're going to find very many people out there arguing that they have a better campaign than Gran Turismo 4. Gran Turismo 4 feels like the perfected form of the traditional Gran Turismo campaign structure, with an absolute boatload of events, cars, and tracks that is going to be difficult to recreate at the current level of fidelity in a single game. Every game released after Gran Turismo 4 that tries to emulate its structure just ends up feeling like GT4 with less. I think a lot of people would have been content if Gran Turismo 7 had played it safe and had just been another instance of GT4 with less. That's certainly the expectation I had going into Gran Turismo 7 from that world map reveal, and I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more than what we ended up with, but I've also been getting tired of waiting 5 to 6 years for just another GT4 with less. Of the 3 points I laid out in this video, I think the structure is the one in most need of change, and it's conveniently also the one that's the most malleable. Keep the vibe and find different campaign structures that also have the freedom, expressiveness, and replayability that the series is known for. I'm sure there are ways to retain that Gran Turismo flavor without resorting to emulating Gran Turismo 4 again. Just look at Konami's Enthusia Professional Racing on the PS2 for a game that gets shockingly close. While playing GT7, I experienced a handful of internet outages that caused me to lose campaign progress multiple times. I don't need anyone to explain to me why I should be demanding that this game be playable offline, or why I should be angry about nerfed prize payouts and the limited time car sales nudging players towards pricey microtransactions for in-game currency. I totally get all of that. But even if these issues were miraculously fixed overnight, that ultimately isn't going to make the Gran Turismo 7 campaign good. That's what I mean when I say these issues are secondary to me. Not that these aren't issues, but that they're secondary. If you're a casual driving game fan and a single player campaign is a must-have checklist item, but you aren't bothered too much by the implementation details, go nuts. You'll probably have a great time with Gran Turismo 7. But for die-hard Gran Turismo campaign fans, it's a shame that the game that was supposed to be a triumphant return ended up falling so flat.